Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Wednesday morning's online seminar. Today we have an update on Jon's earlier seminar in the year on the Brexit effect. Jon Sharp, consultant solicitor for civil law, was running this morning.
Morning, Julie. How are you?
Or the Q&A tool in the bottom toolbar there. Jon will answer as many of these as he can at the end of the presentation. And also, if there's something you'd like to ask Jon, but you don't particularly want to ask it in an open forum, please feel free to email him directly. And his email details are silverllp.com. Okay, without any further ado, Jon, I'll hand over to you.
Many thanks, Julie. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The Brexit effect, an update. When I first prepared these slides back in February, it was very much early days, but unfortunately, some of what I said there has now really come home to roost. So I hope you find this update useful, though, as I said, some of the effects are now being felt, especially in the construction industry. That's me, less said about him, the better. So I'm going to just run through a little history of how we ended up in the EU, the Brexit trail, deal or no deal, how it looks now, structure-specific issues, including in particular logistics and labour, a little touch on was it worth buying that house abroad, and then I'll come to some conclusions, and please feel free to ask any questions. A little history. The EU was effectively formed out of a Scandinavian model, which I think involved Norway, Sweden, I think Denmark originally. And they came up with the concept, as they were all trading in similar products, of effectively having a free trade zone. So no tariffs, no very little border control, and certainly no charges for importing or exporting goods from those countries. That was formed just before the Second World War in about 1936, I think. And then after the end of the Second World War, so in about 1946, 1947, a number of EU countries, I think the founding members were France and Holland, all started to discuss the concept of having effectively a free trade zone, where countries would not charge each other tariffs for importing and exporting goods. But at its heart, that's what the EU originally started to be. It was simply a free trade zone. There was no intention then, certainly, to have commonality of rules or of freedom of movement of people, etc. It was simply designed as a free trade zone. And we tried to join this free trade zone, which then consisted certainly of France, Germany, etc. by the time the late 60s arrived. But unfortunately, Charles de Gaulle hated us shortly and wouldn't let us join the EU, which we very much wanted to do simply because of trade. When Charles de Gaulle died, we were able to join the EU, and we simply joined it to obtain the benefits of having a free trade zone. My father then used to work for an American company importing medical products to England and to Europe. It was cumbersome for him as basically a businessman to have to complete the forms in relation to importing the goods from the US, and then he had to do another set of forms if he was exporting the goods into Europe. So when in 1974 the the opportunity came to vote to join this free trade zone, my father, along with many other people as well, said, yes, let's do this, simply because it would make business more efficient and less paperwork heavy. But in essence, then, all the EU was a free trade zone. Now, as we all know, the EU developed from there, and Brussels increasingly became more powerful, and those that had joined the EU became subject to many new rules and regulations. And there was, I'm very sorry about that, that's not me, that's the rubbish man next door. And there became an increasing disillusionment in England, I think is the best way to describe it, about being what many people thought was being dictated to by Brussels. So, as we all know again, we had a referendum, and very close though it was, the decision was made for us to leave the EU. Unfortunately, leaving was not quite as easy as everyone thought it would be. There was provision in the legislation for countries to leave, but that would require the giving of 2 years' notice. And then there would also be a transition year. Now, again, as we all know, this was dragged out for a long time before eventually a deal was done with the EU to regulate its continuing trading relationship. There are, and still are, many issues concerning borders, in particular the border in Northern Ireland. And we no longer have the same relationship that we had with Europe in relation to trade. There is, it is true to say, still the existence of some free trade between us and Europe, but that only relates to goods that are wholly manufactured within the EU states or wholly manufactured in England and Wales. If you that are not wholly made within the EU or the UK, then you are liable to pay trade tariffs, and this has necessarily started to lead to an increase in the cost of goods and materials, about which I will talk a little later. The position in law is also, in 1982, an act was passed called the Civil Jurisdiction and Judgments Act, which effectively meant that if you obtained a judgment in an EU country, so you obtained judgment here, for example, against a French company, you could enforce that judgment very easily. The French courts, providing there was not any procedural irregularity or any right of appeal, would simply enforce the judgment against that French company without further ado. Same situation here. If a German company obtained a judgment against an English company, everything had been done properly in Germany. The English courts don't reopen the case. They would simply enforce that judgment against the English company. Now, that position is still not quite decided, but it's very unlikely that that simple process will be maintained. It's far more likely that the EU jurisdictions will now start to scrutinise the judgment of the English courts rather than just enforcing it without looking at the substance. This obviously has an impact in relation to abilities of English companies to enforce trading and contract agreements in the event of default against other countries in the EU. However, the reality is that at the moment things are still curiously quiet, and that's because of, I do apologise for that, they're not emptying just my bin, the effect of COVID. We are nowhere near the trading levels of activity that we were pre-COVID. And indeed, as we all know, travel, etc., is not back to the levels that it was. So I'm not quite sure whether the average person in the street would actually see that there's been too much real change. But real change is on the way, and its effects, I suspect, will be felt very clearly once everything returns to more or less pre-COVID normality, which is probably likely to be March of next year. So that's how the map of Europe now looks. There's two maps there. I'm not quite sure what the difference between the two is, but there we are. One's in colour and one's just blue. And there we are. The one on the right shows the member states of the EU, those that are candidates to join the EU. And there we are in red, no longer part of the EU. Construction-specific issues. Firstly, will there be an increase or decrease in regulation of the construction industry? As those from the construction industry will know, there have been many EU regulations which the construction industry has had to comply with. Are these likely to continue? Well, the short answer is probably yes. It's unlikely that the United Kingdom will unilaterally stop enforcing what EU regulations they are, because most of them have been passed into English law, and there certainly seems no appetite at the moment to start repealing those. There may well be tinkering around the edges going forward in relation to some of those regulations. And it may also be the case that in due course, some EU regulations, whilst they may well be implemented here, may well be watered down somewhat if Parliament thinks that they are burdensome on the construction industry. However, it's very early days yet. But if you suddenly think, well, we're now not part of the EU, I don't need to comply with that regulation, I'm afraid that's not going to be the case. Those regulations will remain in force and will do so for some considerable period of time until such time as Parliament decides that, well, yes, we need to make a change to the law. It's also not going to be in the government's interest to change too much too quickly. The basis of the deal is that effectively we will operate a legal system and regulatory system that is akin to that operates in Europe. That's the quid pro quo for effectively still having something of a free trade zone in relation to trading with the rest of Europe. Obtaining goods and materials, finding labour, logistics, and recovering monies owed. Well, in relation to obtaining goods and materials, I think everyone has probably already noticed that the cost has risen. There is a perfect storm of factors that have contributed to the materials shortage. The global construction industry has actually regained momentum fairly quickly. The supply chain, however, was interrupted, with many factories having to close due to COVID. That's obviously led to a backlog of orders. And there is increasingly a lack of basic raw materials. There has been an increase in shipping costs in particular, due to the increased global demand. The construction industry in the States and in China is booming at the moment, and their buying power effectively exceeds ours. The government as well is refusing to change or to allow workers from abroad to come and assist. At the moment, there is a chronic shortage of lorry drivers. We simply haven't got enough of them to distribute the goods that are being demanded by the construction industry at the moment. Superpower countries, as mentioned, the United States and China in particular, are also effectively buying as quickly as they can. And many materials are actually pre-sold before they've even been made. The buying power of these countries far exceeds ours. As a result of that, contractors are not able to stockpile goods as they did before for use on future projects. So the shortage of materials, coupled with an increase in shipping costs, coupled with the lack of drivers to distribute the goods, has led to an increase in the cost of raw materials. That is likely to continue. In addition, you have to remember that tariffs now apply to goods that are not made wholly in the EU. That again has increased the cost of materials. Which materials have been affected in particular? Well, the one that comes to my mind is timber. Timber Trading Federation claims demand for timber has increased in the UK and elsewhere because house builders are catching up on the work missed out during lockdown. Related complications further impact the national timber shortage, as 80% of the softwood used in buildings comes from Europe. 90% of the softwood used in new build housing coming from the continent, where stock in some sawmills is its lowest it's been for over 20 years. This is going to be a real problem going forward. Obtaining goods and materials, job. Put yourself in the position of, say, a German manufacturer. He gets 2 orders in, one from the UK and one from America, pre-Brexit. Now, the UK, he can think to himself, well, okay, I'll deal with that one first. There's no paperwork to fill out. I'm just going to do it, get it off, right? Yes, on the US, he's got paperwork to fill out. However, he now has paperwork to fill out if he's sending it to the UK. And if the US is paying a higher rate, he may well say to himself, well, actually, I'll do the US one. It's just as much trouble, quote, to do the UK one, and I'm being paid more money. So the purchase of goods and materials is going to be a long-term problem, and I can't see it being resolved anytime soon. Cement as well, deliveries of bulk cement are broadly back to normal, say the Minerals Products Associate. But bag cement is still in short supply, with some merchants subsequently increasing their prices by 15%. Plastic problems as well. We all know that there has been a huge demand for plastics at the moment, primarily to put dividers between us all so that we can sit relatively close to each other without spreading the disease. That put a strain on the industry. But in fact, it's now really struggling to keep up with demand. Steel, again, there is a reduction in steel capacity. There is a worldwide shortage, and the availability of steel is going to remain problematic for some time to come. That obviously means that there is a risk to profit margins. So you need to think about, when you're entering into contracts, whether you can give yourself some leeway to take account of the current shortage of materials, because the price is always going to go up. It may well be wise to start thinking about putting a clause in your contract to say that the price may increase, and reserve the right to do so if the cost of raw materials increases. So give yourself some flexibility in your quotations and in your tenders to take account of the likely increase that there will be in goods and materials. And as I said at the start of this, do not forget the delay factor. At the moment, we're operating a freight association, say, at something like 60 to 70% of what normal traffic was with Europe because of COVID. There have already been one or two instances of delays, and there's always the possibility that the Irish situation, especially in Northern Ireland, will arise again. And therefore, try and build in, if you can, some flexibility in your timetable for completing a project. There will be delays at some stage, and you need to really be thinking about taking account of that properly when you are considering entering into contracts for a new build or indeed refurbishment. So think about that. Think about the increase in cost of materials. Have you given yourself sufficient margin in your quotation? And think about the possibility of delay. On the subject of delay, the other issue that the construction industry is, of course, facing is the question of finding labour. Now, in relation to finding labour, there are considerable new rules. Now, I am not an employment lawyer, but I've had a look at the new rules under the new Act, and I have to say it's pretty frightening. It is virtually impossible now to, unless you are importing skilled workers under some form of sponsorship scheme, to attract workers from abroad here. The rules are in particular extremely complex. There is this points system, which you need a degree in mathematics to try and understand, based as it is on salary, education, etc. It is a complete nightmare. Other countries who are looking for labour have a much simplified system. And it's certainly, if I was thinking about going to work abroad, I wouldn't be choosing this jurisdiction, because its immigration rules now are so complex that it's certainly going to cost a great deal of money to do it. But this has had a massive effect on the construction industry. The average age in the construction industry anyway with something like, I think, 2/3 are now over the age of 55. And the construction industry was very dependent upon obtaining labourers from abroad. That is simply not going to be possible at the moment. The government is not for moving on this. It has made some provision in the agricultural industries, but not in any others. So I can foresee that there will be a significant labour shortage, far worse than it is now. So the industry needs to think about having to attract more and more people from, if you like, the home pool into the construction industry, but that is going to take time. That inevitably will lead to a skill shortage. Even if you do encourage people to come into the construction industry who would otherwise have thought of doing something else, then it's going to take time to train them. And therefore there will be a skills gap. It's likely as well that if you do successfully bring someone across from abroad who has a particular skill set and you manage to get them through the immigration process, that is likely to come at a cost in terms of not only probably a higher salary, but also in terms of possibly having to contribute to their education, sponsorship, etc. Now, there is training and apprentices schemes going, which the government are very much, promoting at the moment. But again, that is going to take time to kick in. So the two issues that are really going to impact on the construction industry as a result of Brexit are the cost of goods and materials, possible delays in relation to transportation and importation of goods, but probably the one that's going to have the most impact is a lack of labour, especially skilled labour. Now, in due course, and I'm quite sure that the construction industry will be well aware of this and will be lobbying the government for a relaxation in the rules akin to the agricultural industry, where you can have the seasonal labouring. But I'm not sure that that's going to happen anytime soon. And therefore, the construction industry needs to be prepared for a potential serious lack of labour in the next 2 to 3 years. I'm afraid, as far as I can see at the moment, that things are going to get worse before they get any better. So one thing that you must consider, given the JCT regulations with regard to timings, etc., you must, I think, try and build in a more flexible regime in terms of completion of works. And I would seriously advise, say, that you only take on construction projects that you are within your current labour capacity. I don't think at the moment it would be particularly wise to take on a huge project because you may have done it before, you were lucky to win it, you've been able to get the labour to do it and all's gone well. Well, you may not be able to get the labour. That's going to put you in breach of contract, and that's going to lead to difficulties. So I think at the moment, until things settle down, that it might be better to work within your existing capacity rather than assuming, well, I'll just take on a few more people, because those people won't necessarily be about. So lastly, on a slightly lighter note, was it worth buying that house abroad? Now, many of us, of course, have not been abroad. We don't know where that place is anymore. for the last 18 months. But unfortunately, when we left the EU, new rules came into place. Those started on the 1st of January 2021. You can now only spend 90 days out of 180 days in Europe at any one time. Gone are the days where you could say, "Ooh, I think I'll go down to my apartment in Spain and I'll stay there for 9 months." No, not anymore. I'm afraid 90 days, your maximum stay limit. So 6 months in any year, and that's in the whole of Europe. So if you've had a month in France and then you think, "Oh, I think I'll take another 6 months," no, that's not going to happen. There has therefore obviously been a rush to apply for dual residency in European countries. That's led to increasing delays. And I'm afraid to say that Europe is not really cooperating very well. It's not just rubber stamping this and saying, "Oh, well, they've had a place here for 6 years. That's fine." No. There are increasingly complex rules, and therefore it's certainly not as easy as it was to get dual residence. Those of you who do remember traveling abroad, remember not to join the EU queue. It's a non-EU queue now. Duty-free allowances have also changed. And I have absolutely no doubt that it won't be very long before mobile tariffs are reimposed when you go to Europe. So although most of us have not seen too much change as a result of Brexit, there are going to be very real impacts when the trading situation returns to normality in probably March, April of next year. And certainly for the construction industry, it's going to have a very real impact if it's not already had them. Supply of materials and goods is going to become increasingly competitive and difficult and therefore more expensive. There are more rules and regulations in relation to trading with Europe, and that's going to be increasing cost and possibly delay. And there are real changes to the labour laws now, and the government is sticking to its guns on this. It's not going to change the rules anytime soon, and therefore a shortage of labour is going to become an increasing problem for the industry. So when entering into contracts, bear those things in mind. You need to give yourself some leeway in the event of delay. You need to take account of a potential labour shortage. And in particular, you need to take account of a very, very real prospect of significant increases in goods and materials. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I hope you found that to be of some use. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, John. And that seems to be, we don't have any questions coming in, so that it would appear you have answered everyone's questions this morning with your with the seminar. Obviously, this is online. As we said earlier, if there is anything specific that you wish to ask John, but don't wish to ask it in an open forum, please feel free to email him. It's Jon Sharp, Jon Sharp @silverllp.com. Right. Have a good day, everyone. I hope everyone's enjoying the hot weather. Long may it last. And we will see.
Yes, Julie, on that note, I should apologise to everyone. As everyone knows who's seen my seminars before, I normally have a tie on, but I'm afraid it's just too hot today.
At least there's no mankini, John, for which we are eternally grateful.
I'm sure everybody is very grateful for that as well.
Right. I will see you later, John. Thank you very much, everyone. And
yes, I'll see you in the office later, Julie.
Take care.
Bye-bye.